The Holy Gospel according to St. John. I invite the assembly to be seated as we read today's Gospel and to join in on the parts that are marked in bold. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him,
"Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he is born blind?"
Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask,
"Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?"
Some were saying,
"It is he."
others were saying,
"No, it is someone like him."
He kept saying, "I am the man." But they kept asking him.
"Then how were your eyes opened?"
He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' Then I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him,
"Where is he?"
and he said, "I do not know." They brought the Pharisees to the man who had formerly been blind. Now, it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees began to ask him how he had received his sight. He said to them, "He put mud on my eyes, then I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath." But others said,
"How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?"
and they were divided. So again they said to the blind man,
"What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened."
He said, "He is a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the blind man who had received his sight and asked them,
"Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?"
His parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but we do not know how it is that now he sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him." So for the second time, they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him,
"Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner."
He answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him,
"What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?"
He answered them, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying,
"You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from."
The man answered, "Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, and they drove him out. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me, so that I may believe in him." Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshiped him. Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him,
Surely we are not blind, are we?
Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say, 'We see,' your sin remains." The gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
This morning's gospel reading reminds me a bit of a 4-act dramatic play. You might want to have your bulletin or your Bible with you this morning, because I'm going to kind of run through the 4 acts this morning. In the first act, we have a man who was born blind. It's a bit of an origin story, and it leaves us wondering several different questions right off the bat. Why is he this way? Is it his fault or his parents' fault that he was born blind? Perhaps we modern folks wonder, well, is this karma? We wonder if this is God's justice for some sort of secret sin committed down the line by someone. Jesus will not have any of that sort of thinking. God is not like a cosmic slot machine or an ATM where we do the right things in the right way and then we get a good result, or vice versa. While it is true that good results sometimes happen as a result of good actions, I have to say that's not always the case. Sometimes kindness isn't really appreciated, and other times the bad guys do win. So, the question's there. Who sinned, this man or his parents? The dramatic tension is already set early on in Act 1. Who's going to get blamed for this? Whose fault is it? And on the other side of this dramatic tension is Jesus, offering another reason. It is in the midst of things like blindness where God chooses to work. When things are chaotic and messy, when things seem to be disrupting our ideas, even about who God is, then it's a pretty good sign that Jesus is present. God uses the cross to remind us of things like that. But the conflict in Act 1 only continues. Now everyone is wondering if this is really the unnamed, formerly blind man. They can't seem to agree on who he is or what has happened to him. All they know is that Jesus did something to him, and now that he can see again. So Act 1 ends with a bit of a mystery. People are wondering, who is this Jesus, and where is he? By the time we get to the beginning of Act 2, in verse 13, it's time to bring in another couple layers of drama. Now the Pharisees, the religious leaders, the authorities get involved along with his parents. And at this point, there's another layer that also gets poured on. Jesus does this on, of all days, the Sabbath, the one day when everyone is supposed to stop working. And because this is outside of the normal, acceptable religious experience of the first century, the Pharisees have some questions about what he did and if, in fact, Jesus is the real deal. This guy named Jesus has to be a sinner, according to them, because he would dare to work on the Sabbath, some would say. While others would say, this guy couldn't have done what he'd done if he was a sinner. So they don't quite know what to think about Jesus. So they asked the man who was formerly blind, what do you think? So now it's time for a little bit of truth-telling about the blind man's identity. So his parents get asked if this in fact really was or is their kid, and if he really was born blind. It's at this point that the first century hearers of this would have known that his parents are in fact in a really, really tough bind. If they don't say that Jesus healed this man who was born blind, then they come across as liars, and their integrity is in question. But if they do, they also run the risk of running amok of the religious authorities, and they also run the risk of being excommunicated and very much ostracized with every single part of their life. If they were kicked out of the synagogue, which was a very real possibility, it would have been better for them to have left town and to have started over somewhere else. So they take the safe way out, and they don't answer the question with a clear answer. All they say is, our son's a grown-up, so you can ask him. So Act 2 ends with us seeing fear from his parents and the Pharisees. Fear and anxiety seem to be winning the day. It all kind of comes to a head in Act 3. Verse 24 shifts the attention to the man who was formerly blind himself. It's a showdown between him and the Pharisees. And the main question then gets set. Where is God in all of this? The Pharisees want to do everything they can to put distance between Jesus and God. Their logic goes something like this. If it's something good that happened, it must be from God, not from Jesus. They, quote unquote, know that Jesus is a sinner because he healed on the Sabbath. And a sinner most certainly cannot be the Messiah. So, it's as if the mighty and powerful Pharisees have their minds made up about everything. Jesus can't be from God because he would dare to heal on the Sabbath. They don't see that Jesus is in fact coming, though, to do something new. Something that is in fact not bound by their understanding of the law. And not only do they think that they have Jesus figured out, they think they have the man born blind figured out. They see him for what they think he is. Someone born entirely in sin, they say. But they can't or won't see that the only sin that matters this morning in our gospel reading is theirs. Their sin of unbelief. That God is actually doing something very powerful in Jesus. Meanwhile, the man who was born blind stood up to the authorities by telling the truth, even if it's going to cost him. So now we get to Act 4, starting at verse 35, and we have the finale. And what we have is really one significant series of contrasts. The religious leaders have thrown the man born blind out and have ostracized him once again. But Jesus comes to the man born blind once again. The outcast of a man believes and sees who Jesus is, while some of the Pharisees wind up wondering if they're blind to what God is doing through Jesus. The Pharisees speak of Jesus as a sinner earlier in the gospel, but Jesus winds up letting them know that they are in fact sinning because they saw what happened, and still they don't believe. And so now things come into focus for us. Sin isn't about illnesses or disability. Sin is about our resistance to Jesus' work in our lives, which is a perfect moment for us to be in as we're in the middle of Lent. Where, brothers and sisters, are our own blinders? Where are we not seeing the work of Jesus, healing, restoring, and bringing about new light? Where do our eyes need to be opened? Rather than being stuck in despair about our sin, could this be a time when we see that Jesus has a way of coming to those of us who are, in fact, blinded by the sin of unbelief, and trusting that in the midst of that, there is Jesus, in bread and wine, in water, in the Word, in the community of the faithful, bringing us to the moment when we would say with confidence, I once was blind, but now I see. Thanks be to God. Amen.